Secretary of State Mike Pompeo blasting President Biden for blaming his predecessor.
Every president confronts challenges. This president confronted a challenge in Afghanistan. He has utterly failed to protect the American people from this challenge. I wouldn't have let my 10-year-old son get away from this kind of pathetic blame shifting.
But let's also not forget that Pompeo fully supported negotiations with the Taliban for a troop withdrawal from Afghanistan. Congressman Michael Waltz joins me now. He is on the Armed Services Committee. Congressman, you also served in Afghanistan. You have been there multiple times over the last 20 years. What is your reaction to seeing these images showing how quickly the Taliban was able to regain control?
Well, it's heartbreaking and it's infuriating. And it didn't have to be this way. I think this, Pam, is going to go down as the worst foreign policy disaster in modern American history. It's a disaster from a humanitarian standpoint. My heart breaks for the Afghan women, the journalists, the civil society leaders that are being hunted down as we speak. It's a disaster for U.S. credibility. Can you imagine what Ukraine and Taiwan and others are thinking right now? They're terrified watching how this administration abandoned our allies. And then I think it's a disaster from a national interest standpoint for counterterrorism. We will see Al-Qaeda 3.0. We will see a repeat of what happened in Iraq when we pulled out too soon under the Obama administration and ISIS came roaring back, caliphate the size of Indiana, attacks across the West. And I think there was just clearly no plan. There was no plan to help our SIV, our interpreters. There was no plan to help those in civil society. And there's now no plan for bases in the region to go after Al-Qaeda if they come back. We're flying blind in Afghanistan right now as we approach the 20th anniversary of 9/11. We're both hearing from veterans, from Gold Star families, from 9/11 victims, saying, what was it all for? Was our sacrifice in vain? I would tell them loud and clear it was not. America was kept safe for 20 years, but this is incredibly hard to swallow.
And on that note, what would you say to the White House who would say, well, you don't want to just keep combat troops there on the ground, risking their lives to project meaning on lives that have been lost. You don't want to be in another country's civil conflict in perpetuity. And also this argument that they're just carrying out what the Trump administration bargained with the Taliban, the deal that the Trump administration struck.
Yeah, so we'll take that backwards. Number one, President Biden has shown no problem with tearing up Trump administration deals, whether it was Nord Stream, whether it was Keystone, whether it was the Iran policy, Israel and Palestine. So to say that you can't pivot from your predecessor, I think is frankly a feckless excuse. But bigger picture, what we're dealing with here is an ideology. And Americans need to understand and need to hear from the commander-in-chief of all administrations that it takes a long time to defeat an idea. It's easy to bomb a tank, hard to defeat an idea. It's taken decades to defeat communism, fascism, and it's going to take a long time to defeat Islamic extremism. But Biden's own intelligence community is very clear. Al-Qaeda intends to reconstitute, and this problem will follow us home. So the next Pulse nightclub, the next San Bernardino, the next 9/11 is going to be on this administration's watch. And I have seen no plan from the Pentagon, the State Department, or anyone else in their briefings to Congress. When we have to send our soldiers back, sadly, to deal with Al-Qaeda 3.0, no bases, no local allies, they've been hunted down, and no one that'll trust us again. How many soldiers are we going to lose in the future because we put arbitrary timelines on defending America?
And as you know, the White House also argues that the Taliban is in a stronger position now because the past administration did deal making with them and give them legitimacy. The question is, looking forward.
And I was clear on the record. That was a bad deal.
I
think that was a bad deal. I never trust. I thought the Taliban were using these talks the entire time to get us out, and that's exactly what they've been able to do. But I also put, look, the buck stops at the president if he thought that was a bad deal, and he was advised by the Pentagon and by his intelligence community, leave a small presence. We're not talking hundreds of thousands, a small presence to provide that support to the Afghan army and to continue our counterterrorism. We have to stay on offense. We can't wait till it strikes us back home.
Talking about the national security threat, Al-Qaeda 3.0 is your concern, and now there are U.S. weapons in Afghanistan. What the U.S. had supplied to the Afghan forces that are now at the disposal of the Taliban.
That's right. I mean, there are literally dozens of massive caches of artillery, heavy armor, heavy weapons, ammunition that are now at the disposal of the Taliban and al-Qaeda. It's very important to point out that al-Qaeda and the Taliban have not divorced. They will come roaring back. They fully intend to. The intelligence is clear there. But again, I haven't seen a plan to deal with that, because when our military goes, our intelligence eyes and the ears go, our contractors go, everyone's gone. And I think that's one of the reasons that we saw a collapse so quickly, because we've been blind the last several months on the ground.
And I just want to get to, as we wrap this up, your personal experience on the ground. You worked with the Afghans, you had interpreters, you worked very closely with them. There's a lot of talk, or the administration conveying that they're surprised that the Afghan forces essentially melted away so quickly in facing the Taliban. What do you say to that?
You know, one of the things you have to understand on the ground is the battlefield psychology. We saw this in Iraq. And now we're seeing it in Afghanistan. When the overall narrative from the Taliban is America has abandoned you, and you hear it from the commander-in-chief in the White House, and they're giving a choice to that Afghan army commander. We're going to win eventually. You can either surrender and go home to your family, or face beheading and face a gruesome death. And when that's the kind of the narrative on the ground, or even for those Afghan army commanders that stood strong, they don't go after them, they go after their families, right? Imagine if our soldiers' families were at risk when they're out there fighting. And that's the psychology that the Taliban used so effectively. And just some air support, just what the Afghans, have to hear on the ground. They don't care about 200 troops, 2,000, 20,000. They need to hear America is with you. And what we saw in 2001 when we invaded was American air support bolsters their spine. This could have been prevented. One more piece, Pam. The Taliban haven't done this on their own. Pakistan is behind them. Pakistan is complicit. And I'm calling for sanctions, and I'm calling for a freezing of aid on Pakistan for this proxy war. We need to take a drastic new strategy. And I think the decision for the administration going forward is what now? Right. Do they shrug their shoulders and just accept this festering cancer of terrorism?
Right.
Or do we support a resistance? Do we take additional measures? Do we change strategies?
And you're saying that because Pakistan has been accused of harboring al-Qaeda, the Taliban leading them to this point. And it's interesting, a Pakistani official came out today blaming the U.S. for putting them in the situation with Afghanistan. There's a lot more to talk about, but Congressman Mike Waltz, I appreciate you coming on to also speak about your personal experience and all the service you have given to this country. Thank you so much.
My heart's breaking.
Up next, we're going to hear from a Democratic congressman who also served